In this episode, I look at the infamous torture, interrogation and execution centre Tuol Sleng Prison, or better known as S-21 Prison, which was led by the evil army, the Khmer Rouge, during the Cambodian Genocide, where they tortured everyone until they were admitted of doing illegal activities and accused of being traitors. Hello and welcome to part 14 of my Vietnam and Cambodia adventure. If you want to catch up what I've done so far on my trip, you can click the card above me, or all links are in the description box below. Now we've come to the third and final part of my kind of mini documentary of the atrocity of the Cambodian Genocide. Part 1 was on what happened and why it did happen. Part 2 was all about everyone being sent to the killing fields to be executed with absolutely no one escaping. And now part 3 is what life was like to be at S-21 prison. It was originally a high school converted into a prison and was the biggest and most famous one out of the 200 torture prisons during the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia. From 1976 to 1979, an estimated 20,000 prisoners were kept here, and miraculously only 12 people survived. As of mid-September 2011, only 4 of the survivors are thought to be still alive to this day, and 3 of them can regularly be seen working at the prison to this day, where they will share their experiences of living there and what it was actually like through different meets and greets. And also they can be seen, well, selling their books and biographies, and half the money goes to charity of all the victims that suffered during the genocide. Now if you were unlucky enough to be arrested for any number of crimes, like being intellectual or educated by working in a skilled job like a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or wearing glasses, or having soft hands, or even speaking a different language, these were all very good reasons apparently to be arrested and sent to S-21 or any of the other 200 prisons that were operating during the regime. Victims were tortured and forced to confess on having done something against the revolution and being disloyal to the leader Pol Pot. Those who were accused of treason were then brought with their families because the Khmer Rouge believed all of them were disloyal. So pretty much they torture you until you admit that you're an offender, because they want you to admit who you really are, someone who's impure, as they believed everyone was a spy, everyone was an agent, and you're either working for the CIA, the KGB, or even Vietnam. But however, after being tortured repeatedly day after day, night after night, most people couldn't take it anymore and just lied. Because although many were obviously innocent and obviously they weren't all spies, many just couldn't take the unbearable amount of suffering anymore, so they just lied and said that they were an offender so the torture could at least stop. However, once they admitted, they were then sent to the killing fields, where they were then executed. So really, to stay alive, it was in your best interest to just keep being tortured, which was obviously nearly impossible to do, and well, obviously they didn't know that they were going to be sent to the killing fields to be executed. Apparently, if they think someone is a spy with, I don't know, let's just say the name John, then they will interrogate everyone with the same name. That just makes no sense, and how bloody out of order is that? Most prisoners at S-21 were held there for 2 to 3 months before either dying of starvation, dying of exhaustion from severe torture methods, or just execution from being sent to the killing fields. The torture system at S-21 was designed to make prisoners confess to whatever crimes they were charged with. Prisoners were routinely beaten and tortured with electric shocks, searing hot metal instruments, and hanging, as well as through the use of various other devices. Some prisoners were cut with knives or suffocated with plastic bags. Other methods for generating confessions was pulling out fingernails while pouring alcohol on the wounds, holding prisoners' heads underwater and using the waterboarding technique. Women were sometimes raped by their interrogators, even though sexual abuse was against Cambodia's policy. However, the perpetrators who were found out were then executed, although many prisoners died from this kind of abuse. Killing them outright was discouraged, as the Khmer Rouge needed their confessions. The Khmer Rouge regime is also well known for having practiced tortures and also medical experiments. Tortures weren't only meant to force the prisoner to confess, they were just used for fun among the prison guards. They feared that they would become prisoners themselves of the same prison if they treated the prisoners well. But the stupid thing is that because there weren't any doctors, because they'd all been either arrested, killed, or sent to the countryside to work as a farmer, the Khmer Rouge thought the best thing to do was to employ child medics, who were just teenagers with hardly any training or no training whatsoever. They didn't have any knowledge of Western medicine. Well, it had been forbidden since it was a capitalist invention, and they had to practice their own medical experiments and make progress by themselves. So when and if they had to perform any kind of surgery or any kind of experiment on a prisoner, they obviously didn't have any medicine, so they would just have to do the job without any anesthetics. I mean, if it wasn't bad enough the kid not knowing what the hell he was doing in the first place, but to top it all off, the prisoner has to endure the whole bloody procedure with him feeling absolutely everything. Oh, bloody hell. And here's a few stories of what actually happened. A 17-year-old girl had her throat slit and her abdomen pierced before being beaten and put into water for the whole night. This procedure was repeated many times, and it was carried out without anesthetics. Child medics cut off the intestine of a living person and they joined their ends in order to study the healing process. The patient died after 3 days due to the operation. Well, no Sherlock. In the same hospital, other medics trained by the Khmer Rouge opened the chest of a living person for no reason whatsoever, just to see the heart beating. The operation resulted in the immediate death of the patient. Well, I ain't bloody surprised. S-21 prison killed at least 100 prisoners by bleeding them to death, by draining their blood just to see how long they'd survive. Oh, now, drug testing was also performed, for instance by injecting coconut juice into a living person's body and studying the effects. And if you didn't know, and I didn't know, coconut juice injection was often lethal. Great, lovely to know. And finally, prisoners were sliced open and had organs removed with no anesthetic. I mean, those are just a few examples. I'm sure that there's tons of them after the 4 years of them operating there as well. You know, hearing all of this really makes sense on why they did all of this just for leisure, to prove that they can kill and can be evil, because if they weren't, then they'd be killed themselves. But really did you have to do it in such horrific ways? It's like something out of a Saw movie or something. We were first introduced to the VIP section of the prison. These cells often included people from the old government or military personnel. They had big rooms and the original iron beds were still here, to which you'd be shackled into for most of the day. It feels very eerie in these rooms. You could just feel the despair and death. On the walls are photographs of the victims that were found dead in when the Vietnamese army took control of the prison and photographed immediately what they saw. You can still see dried blood and stains on the floors and ammunition boxes which were used as toilets. And if knocked over, they would have to clean up the whole mess with only their tongue. Yep, that's right, licking up your own urine and poo. Other parts of the prison had different cells which contained different prisoners. You were either in a bricked cell, which again had not much in, just shackles, and another ammunition box as your toilet, and you can really see how small they are, just enough room to lay in really. Or you'd be in a wooden cell where it even had its own door too, but to me it looks a bit more narrower. I attempted to close the door behind me and get a feeling of being locked in here, which felt really uncomfortable. Or you wouldn't even have a cell. You'd be placed in a room with 30 to 40 other prisoners and shackled with both feet to the floor. Oh, horrible. There's literally nothing to do. You're just waiting there all day for the next cycle of torture to happen. I then viewed one of the torture methods called the gallows. It was a large beam in the air to which you'd be hanging from with your hands tied behind your back and hanging downwards and interrogated. If you were to lose unconsciousness, to which many victims did, you would then be dunked head first into these jars, which would be smelly, dirty water, which would be filled with every prisoner's toilet waste. So, you guessed it, all people's urine and poo would be in those jars. You'd go headfirst into it and immediately be woken up. Then the interrogating would resume, and then this would happen again and again until you'd either had enough or you confessed to being disloyal. Prisoners received very little food. They received 4 little small spoonfuls of rice porridge or watery soup twice a day. You could literally count the individual pieces of rice in your bowl. It was that little. Drinking water without asking the guards for permission resulted in serious beatings. They weren't allowed to exercise, they weren't allowed to talk to each other, and they hardly had any time to sleep. The unhygienic living conditions in the prison caused skin diseases, lice, rashes, ringworm, and other ailments. The prisoners were exhausted, disorientated, and very easily swayed. Many confessed to treasonous activities without even being tortured. Others were subjected to such intense torture that it eventually killed them. Some of the prisoners even committed suicide, one by grabbing a guard's gun and shooting himself in the head, and one by flinging himself off the 3rd balcony of the prison to his death. We visited another part of the prison that literally had endless amount of photographs of the prisoners. The first moment they enter the prison, they have their photo taken. You just can't relate to what they must be feeling, and also to which they have no idea to what's coming to them, but more to the fact that all of these people are now dead. Then there are photographs of all the Khmer Rouge guards who worked at the prison, and as mentioned in part 1, they are all very, very young soldiers. All of the interrogation, torturing and execution performed were by these people. Now, there were around 12 or so survivors out of the 20,000 prisoners. I say 12 or so because upon researching, there's so many different reports that say different numbers, so I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was 7 adults and 5 children, with only 4 remaining survivors to this day. And 3 of them still go to the prison on a daily basis, telling their stories to the tourists and teaching people on what happened, so something like this never happens again. We then met one of the child survivors, Nong Chan Pao. I've no doubt pronounced that completely wrong, but he was just 9 years old when he was found hiding under a pile of clothes with his brother at S-21 prison, who then spoke about his experience here and how his mother was killed here too. It was such a sad story to hear, and how he managed to survive. It brought everyone to tears, especially when he started getting emotional himself when talking about how he wants to care and bring up his own children. I even shed a little tear too. I mean, I don't think you'd be human after hearing all the monstrous things that went on there. It's just a shame it was a bit hard to understand what he was saying because, well, obviously he's not English.
So slower than another lady. Then clearly take her head like that, my mother falls down and swear. I'm sorry like that, why did you do my mother?
Here's a photograph taken by the Vietnamese soldiers the moment he was found naked with his brother and other kids in 1979. He appeared in court in 2009 detailing his ordeal with some leaders of the Khmer Rouge as well as prison leaders to testify against them. And this year, 2018 in June, he released a book on what his life was like living there, for which he released it at the prison, in schools and also orphanages. It's just a bit of a shame because I was there a month prior in May, so I would have definitely picked one up. Next up was seeing survivor Chum May. He had been working as a mechanic for the Khmer Rouge when suddenly he was arrested on the 28th of October 1978 and taken straight to S-21, no questions asked. He still doesn't even know why to this day. 2 guards took turns beating him with a stick covered in twisted wire. Eventually they decided to pull out his big toenail. He looks down at his feet and explains in unflinching detail how the guard tugged and twisted the nail until it came out. I could tolerate the pain of being beaten and even having my toenail pulled out, but it was the electric shocks I was terrified of, he says. These were administered by electrodes placed inside his ears. Chum May is deaf in one ear as a result and says he hears the sound of rushing water when he moves his head. It felt like my eyes were on fire and my head was a machine. After that, I started telling them whatever they wanted to hear. I didn't know what was right or wrong anymore. He was prisoned for just over 4 months. His wife and kids were shot at trying to flee, and died. He was kept alive because he was a good mechanic. He could fix typewriters, which were used for typing up confession letters, as well as fixing sewing machines for making soldiers' uniforms. He now sells his biography with money sold going towards his family and the rest to the charity for the victims of the Cambodian Genocide. And the next survivor we met was Bo Meng. He was only kept alive because the S-21 prison leader, Comrade Dutch, found out he was an artist and told him to paint the leader, Pol Pot. However, he was told if it wasn't good enough, he'd be killed. It took him 3 months to finish the painting, but alas, it was good. And here it is, and no, this is not a photograph, this is actually a painting. It was so good, the leaders requested he kept painting people and leaders. He did so with no questions asked, to which kept him alive. He was prisoned for 2 years and endured countless number of tortures with scars to show. He lost his wife to the killing fields and his kids to starvation. But they don't envy the guards that tortured them. They said they would have done the same thing as them, because it was literally kill or be killed. And lastly, on the way out, I saw a big board with lots of different laws on, for which when the prisoners arrived, this is the first thing that they would have seen, for which they had to abide by. Here's a list of the rules that are complete nonsense. A few to me are completely ridiculous, but the main one is just ludicrous. Number 6, while getting lashes or electrification, you must not cry at all. Really? Really? But in 1979, when the Vietnamese came in to take control of Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge slaughtered every last prisoner before fleeing, with only the 12 survivors left. In 2009, the prison leader Comrade Dutch faced trial and was sentenced to life in prison. Bit of a shame he wasn't executed really, but that's the justice system for you. And that's the end of part 3, and actually the end of my Cambodian genocide story. I hope you've liked watching this kind of mini documentary as much as I've liked researching about it, because I really want this story to be talked about and actually learn about, because it's so unbelievable that this actually happened. I mean, you literally couldn't write this. It feels like it's all pretend. Like, how can something like this atrocity happen? Anyway, in the next video, I leave Phnom Penh and head to Siem Reap. I'll especially be heading to Angkor Wat, where I'll be observing the famous temples and architecture in the region. And as always guys, if you felt like you liked this video, then please don't forget to like and share the video with your friends and family, and also please don't forget to subscribe and also click that bell icon so you'll be notified when I post new videos, which I try and do weekly. But anyway guys, hopefully you've learnt a lot, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Okay guys, bye.